This is Think Out Loud on OPB. I'm Jeff Norcross, in for Dave Miller. 2 years ago this week, the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore collapsed after a container ship lost power and rammed into one of its piers. 6 people were killed, and shipping traffic to the port of Baltimore was blocked for nearly 3 months. People who drive big ships on the Columbia River say it's becoming increasingly likely the same thing could happen here. The Lewis and Clark Bridge between Rainier, Oregon and Longview, Washington is in danger of a similar catastrophe. Henry Brannan wrote about this for the Columbian and the Daily News, and he joins us now. Henry, welcome to Think Out Loud.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So there are a lot of bridges on the lower Columbia, and I want to ask you about this one, and I know that the answer is multi-part, but boil it down for us. Why is this particular bridge so vulnerable?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect storm of factors. I think, for starters, the channel, when it was built, cost was an issue. And so it follows the run of the river. And the river bends right there, which means the deepest part of the river is close to the Washington side. And so what that means in short is just that ships come within about 80 feet of the east support pier, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about 1,200 foot long ships, that's pretty close. Also, because the bridge has a bit of an arc or an arch, that also means that some of these taller ships are getting close to the underside of it. I should also say, when the channel was built, or when the bridge was built, the channel was about 500 feet wide. Today, it's about 600 feet wide, which I guess brings me to the second factor, which is that ships have basically doubled in size since then. Like I mentioned, ships are now about 1,200 feet long at times, some of the longest ones in the river at least. And then the bridge itself, it's old. It doesn't have any of the concrete protectors around the piers. Those are known as dolphins. And then it also sags in the cold by a couple feet. And then, it also doesn't have sensors on it, known as air gap sensors, which means that the pilots have to basically do math about 3,000 times a year. So yeah, like I said, it's basically just a perfect storm of factors it faces.
Okay, so to summarize, the ships are much bigger. The channel runs too close to the Washington side and therefore the pier on that side. And the bridge is old, it sags, and there are no sensors under the bridge. Is that basically it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
You point out in your reporting that there have been some close calls. Can you describe one?
Yeah. Back in 2022 is one that really grabbed me. I heard about there's this ship. It's a cruise ship known as the Celebrity Eclipse. And while ships like that don't generally go in the Columbia River, Portland has an important dry dock that some of these larger ships are fixed at. And so when it was leaving, the pilots told me, Columbia River pilots, I should say, told me it was about 4 feet from the underside of the bridge. Which alone is pretty close. But then in meetings with Oregon and Washington years later, they actually found out that the bridge does indeed sag. And then, of course, the water level sensors, just to add another thing in the river around Longview, they found can vary by about a foot. So in theory, that clearance could have been as little as about 13.2 inches.
Oh, my God.
And I suppose I should also
more than
mention,
a foot.
Yeah, and some ships they'd also found had underreported their height. Yeah. So, I should note here that, importantly, that these pilots are some of the most highly trained in the world. I talked to a handful of shipping industry experts who said these are among the best in the world. They have years and years of training. They have decades of experience before that. They do know quite literally every bend, every buoy in the river. But still, it's a big issue.
Yeah. These Columbia River pilots, they are brought on board to navigate the river. The captains of the ships are not asked to do that. So these are the people who are sounding the alarm about this bridge?
Yeah, they're very stoic people. They certainly didn't seek me out to talk about this. But when I called them about it, they did tell me, and the shipping industry at large, from talking to folks up and down the river, they've basically spent a decade trying to get this problem solved behind the scenes through advocacy that until very recently has mostly fallen, policymakers have not necessarily been receptive, I would say.
Okay. That seems to be changing, though, and we'll get to that in a minute. One thing that jumped out in your reporting, when you spoke to one of the river pilots, they called it a single point failure bridge, meaning if any part of it gets hit, it's coming down?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at one point, as I understand it, there's some wood protectors, but those are gone, and there's certainly no concrete ones. So yeah, that was a pretty startling thing to be told.
The disaster in Baltimore 2 years ago was caused by a ship losing power. Does that happen on the Columbia too?
Yeah, that was another startling thing to happen. I had no idea, and I don't think really many people do. But about twice a month, ships experience some type of outage on the river. An engine failure or rudder failure or something like that. Yeah, so I mean, the pilots told me that generally they regain control quickly. It's reported to the Coast Guard, and I was told point blank, if we have an engine failure, we will steer it into the shore before we hit the bridge. That would be the worst case scenario.
If they have time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the issue. I remember the president of the pilots told me that if the failure in Baltimore had happened a minute earlier, none of this would have happened. And so, of course, the next question I asked is, well, what happens if the failure happens at the exact moment then? And that's when I was told, we'd steer it into the bridge. But of course, perfect storm is a perfect storm.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about the vulnerability of the Lewis and Clark Bridge to a collision with a ship. Henry Brannan reported on this for the Columbian and the Daily News. Okay, what's being done about all this?
Yeah, I mean, the sense I got is this is kind of a good moment to talk about it because there is a little bit of good news finally. On a federal level, the Army Corps and the Coast Guard are kind of engaged in this effort to realign the channel. So basically, to put it right in the center of the river, so the pilots don't have to kind of navigate that tricky bend and get so close to both the underside and the support pier of the bridge. And that's the Army Corps has already done its part, and the Coast Guard now is kind of assessing that. On the state front, Washington is in charge of this bridge, and then Oregon is in charge of the Astoria Megler one, as I understand it. And Washington, in this year's 2-year budget, kept in some funding from last year to address the problem, about $1 million. And that would see sensors installed as well as some other measures. There was talk in the shipping industry that it was going to get cut out. Obviously, both states are in kind of difficult budget environments. But last I checked, it was indeed in, so that's good. And then I reached out to ODOT, and they told me that they plan to continue or keep their half of the funding for the sensors that would they would basically help pilots not have to do such precise calculations on the fly in terms of water level and bridge level. And all that.
What kind of timeline are we? What kind of timelines are we looking at for getting all these things done?
Yeah, those were questions I asked, and I did not get answers. I think legislators in the area have said, we've been trying to make this happen for a long time, but Olympia, Salem, they're not as keyed into issues outside of the big population centers. And at the federal level, things happen particularly slowly. And obviously that's, in my reporting, I found that's even more true in this current administration. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like part of the problem potentially is that there are a lot of governments involved here, 2 states and 2 agencies within the federal government. Does that make it hard for coordination?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I will say the Columbia River system is it's an extremely well-oiled machine in terms of shipping and industry. It moves about $31 billion in goods each year, supports tens of thousands of jobs, especially for Southwest Washington and especially Cowlitz County. It's a really important economic driver. So it is the people who kind of lead the system are pretty keyed in, and there's a lot of government relations folks who know how to get stuff done and historically have, which is part of why it was so shocking that this is still kind of a problem, because so many other things they've been very, very successful in bringing home federal money and state money to get it done.
What's different this time?
Yeah, I do not know. And I think the pilots don't know, and the industry doesn't know. Nobody I talked to really knew. And again, this is a very, very stoic industry. But I think people, the sense I got, were pretty frustrated. But they also do, they're they don't go out of their way to complain. They're more kind of like, we're just going to do what we have to do. Um, but yeah, it's definitely harder than ever for them.
Yeah, we've there's this question about bridges here. We've learned a lot about the vulnerability of our bridges, especially in a big earthquake. And given that knowledge, are there any conversations about just replacing the Lewis and Clark Bridge entirely and making it taller and less susceptible to disaster?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the taller and less susceptible to disaster, I don't know if the conversations got to that point. I talked to the Washington State senator who represents the area, Senator Jeff Wilson, and he basically said, "Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we do need to replace this bridge. It's old, it's approaching 100 years old. It certainly doesn't have up to date safety measures, and I mean, but there's been talk for quite a while. I found newspaper stories about a 1991 study that the legislature in Washington did that said, we ought to replace this pretty soon. And, here we are. And it certainly is, I would say, not even much of a point of conversation.
How important is this bridge for movement between Oregon and Washington? There aren't a lot of bridges on the Columbia, after all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what the Department of Transportation over in Washington told me was basically that about 20,000 people use it each day. I'd say it's also particularly important for the region's kind of economy, given that Longview and Cowlitz County at large are such manufacturing job hubs. There's a lot of folks in Oregon who commute over. There's a news story back in 2023 in the Daily News about one company paying, I would imagine, an exorbitant sum to ferry their employees over the river with a helicopter to get them to work. So yeah, I mean, tons of money, tons of commuters, and of course, the Baltimore disaster. 6 people on a maintenance crew died, which is both horrendous and on these major bridges that lots of people use. I mean, it's kind of sickening to say, but a low amount of people. Which, it's not to disregard the loss of life that those people's families had, but it's not. When you look at the bridge, there's certainly more than 6 cars on it at any time. So yeah, pretty consequential.
Yeah, that 20,000 number jumped out at me. I actually didn't know that this bridge was that busy. And, you think about what might happen if the bridge was taken out for whatever reason, aside from the loss of life, which of course is horrifying. But what do you do if you need to get between the two states? Do you go to Portland? Do you go to Astoria? Can you talk a little bit more about the disruption that that bridge going out might cause the region?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing's pretty unimaginable to people. I'd ask them about that question, and they're. I think people didn't want to answer it for understandable reasons. I mean, I think yeah, there's no kind of positive takeaways of that. It'd be pretty damaging. I mean, you can see previews of that when the Wahkiakum County ferry went out, and that put people over in Wahkiakum County, which is in Southwest Washington, between Cowlitz and Pacific counties. That put people in a really difficult situation where commuting to work, they'd have to drive quite a ways one way or the other. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. How often do you drive over this bridge, Henry?
I actually have some family out there and partly grew up out there. So a few times a year for pretty much my entire life.
What do you think about when you go over it now?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, historically, I didn't really think too deeply about it, but, I did drive over it while doing this reporting. And, I was kind of in my head about it. Yeah, I mean, I guess I thought about the details that the pilot shared with me, worrying ones about, the engine failures in particular, and then kind of reassuring details. I mean, these people train, truly an unimaginable amount. I asked them, do you think about it when you go to sleep at night? And they laughed and they're like, oh yeah, we all have reoccurring dreams about this, about steering ships down Main Street and all this type of stuff. But I think, honestly, I mean, the thought I landed on, it's kind of the thought you land on anytime you do a story about, a problem where it's basically like a warning. Is just like, oh God, I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's not that bad. I hope I'm being dramatic. I hope policymakers will listen. I mean, the worst case scenario is vindication. scenario.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should end this conversation on more of an up note. Can you summarize the good news? I mean,
Yeah.
what's hopeful about all this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's hopeful is first and foremost, I think, just the pilots. I was really blown away by their professionalism, by their skill, their training. I mean, they're in a business of inches, and they're the right people for the job. They're really tremendously talented. So for starters, that I mean, this is not necessarily a new problem, even though it is getting worse. So that first and foremost, but then also, I mean, like I said, at a federal level, it is actually finally being addressed. Corps of Engineers has already done its part. Coast Guard is, they didn't tell me how far along they are, but they're doing it. Federal Register notice is out there. And yeah, on the state level, the funding did indeed make it through the budget. So those are some bright sides to end on.
Thank you for that, Henry, and thank you for this conversation. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Henry Brannan wrote about the vulnerability of the Lewis and Clark Bridge for the Columbian and the Daily News in Southwest Washington.